So my name is Rob Porteous, Media Marketing Director here at Burnley Football Club. I'd like to say thank you for all attending today. It's great that we've got representatives from the women's team, obviously under 18s, senior men's team, and obviously Alan as chairman. Obviously this is a session that we wanted to run as part of our exclusivity, diversity and inclusion here at the club. We've got Rafi and his colleagues here from the Fed, Mark Levy from the Jewish Representative Council at the back, and obviously we're here to hear from Ike, who survived the Holocaust a number of years ago. So I'd hand over to Rafi, obviously, who will take you through to the session. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Can I just reiterate and just say thank you very, very much for having us here. The FED, the Federation of Jewish Services, is the largest Jewish social care charity supporting the Jewish community of Greater Manchester. And as part of the FED's work, we run a programme called My Voice, which is incredibly unique in that it chronicles the whole life stories of Holocaust survivors and refugees who came to the UK either before, during or after the war. And what it does is it takes their whole life stories and it records them in the first person in their own words. But what makes it even more special is that when these incredible people like Ike, who you're going to hear from, tell their stories, it's often the first time that they've ever spoken about it, and it's often in their later years of life, so in their 80s or sometimes even in their 90s. And when they do it, often even their families, their children, their grandchildren, don't know the horrors that they experienced during the Second World War and the Holocaust. So that can elicit a significant amount of trauma. And as a social care charity with social workers and everything that we do around that, we provide a holistic wraparound sort of service for the survivors who are telling their stories. And it's an incredibly important thing because as time moves on, unfortunately, there are less and less survivors who are here to bear first-hand testimony to what happened. But before I start, what I'm going to do is just for 5 or 6 minutes, just do a bit of a brief introduction to the Holocaust. We're here because next week on January the 27th is Holocaust Memorial Day, and the club at Burnley are commemorating that event. And Holocaust Memorial Day takes place on January the 27th every year because that's the day that Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated by the Russians. Itzik was in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Before I start, I've just mentioned it, just by a show of hands, who here has heard before now of Auschwitz? Okay, and you all know, again by show of hands, what the Holocaust was and what happened in the Holocaust? And, okay, and do you know how many Jews were murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust? Yeah, okay. So what's important to say is that the Holocaust didn't start in 1939. The Holocaust, or the Shoah in Hebrew, was an attempt by the Nazis and the collaborators to murder all the Jews in Europe. And but it started in 1933 because as soon as Hitler assumed power, they introduced legislation that restricted the rights of all Jews. They excluded them from civil society. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws were passed, which was the protection of German blood and German honour, which forbade Jews from marrying non-Jews, rendered German Jews as non-citizens, and then it barred Jews from professional occupations. It prohibited Jewish children from attending state schools. And in 1938, they decreed by law that all Jewish men had to take the name Israel as the middle name, while women had to assume the name of Sarah. And then on the night of November the 9th in 1938, there was a coordinated wave of violence in Germany, and it resulted in 91 Jews being murdered, 300 synagogues being destroyed, and 30,000 men being sent to concentration camps. And this night was known as Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. And you can see some pictures here on the screen of the aftermath of Kristallnacht. And that was widely seen as a turning point in the Nazi persecution of Jews, because it fueled a vast increase in the Jewish desire to emigrate from Germany, but it also demonstrated the Nazis' sheer brutality to the wider world. And then in 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and that triggered World War II. And then they began to impose their anti-Jewish policies in a country that had the largest Jewish population in Europe. Poland had 3.3 million Jews, almost 10% of the population at the start of the Second World War. And thousands of long-established communities were forced to relocate into strictly designated areas called ghettos. And you can see here some of the larger ones. The population was segregated, they had to live in cramped condition, they were denied access to medicine and to schools, and disease and starvation was rife, and there was increasingly violent policies that the Nazis used against the Jews that took many thousands of lives. The largest ghetto was Warsaw, where 40,000 Jews were crowded into 1.3 square miles, and there were thousands of ghettos across Nazi-occupied Europe. The larger ones were in Lodz, in Krakow, in Białystok, in Lvov, in Lublin, in Vilna, and in Minsk. Ike himself lived in the Jewish ghetto of Ostrowicz in his hometown in Poland, and Jews were forced to wear the Star of David, making them instantly recognizable, and many were used in slave labor factories and businesses outside the ghetto. After the Nazis declared war on the Soviet Union in 1941, the brutality escalated. They had dedicated killing squads that followed the German army, the invading German army, and often with the help of local collaborators, they rounded up local Jewish populations and systematically shot and murdered them and placed them into mass graves. Often the Holocaust, the murder of Jews in the Holocaust is the gas chambers are associated with that, but actually 1.5 million Jews were murdered by being shot and then buried in this cold-blooded manner. And the most notorious of these atrocities was Babi Yar, which is on the edge of Kyiv, which obviously we all hear a lot about now in Ukraine. In just over 2 days, 33,000 Jews were marched to a ravine outside the city, murdered, shot, murdered, and buried in mass graves. Unbelievably, the Nazis were concerned that this scale of personal mass slaughter was having a detrimental mental effect on their soldiers. They weren't worried about the Jews that they were murdering, they were worried about the soldiers. So they began experimenting with alternative methods of killing, and they started that by taking vans, lorries, closing them off, putting Jews inside, and taking a diesel engine and pumping gas in. And they started that in Chełmno, which is one of the mass death camps that they established in Poland. And then they put increasing effort into refining the process of mass killing through the use of gas chambers in all their extermination camps. In 1942, there was a secret conference in Berlin, and there they planned for the mass deportation of murder of all the Jews in Europe, not just the Jews in Eastern Europe, but the Jews in France and in Holland and in Belgium and places that they invaded and occupied. And they constructed a specially constructed network of mass extermination camps. There were 5 of them. There were Auschwitz-Birkenau, there was Treblinka, there was Chełmno, there was Sobibor, and there was Belzec. And it was a huge effort. If you think about it, you're talking about millions of Jews, 6 million Jews, having to be transported across Europe using the train network, using logistics. The involvement of so many thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people in the mass murder of Jews was incredible. And what they did was that they crammed them into cattle cars. And often they had no place to sit down. They were all stood in there. They were cramped in there. There was no sanitation. In the summer, it was boiling hot. In the winter, it was freezing cold. And often, when these transports arrived at the death camps, many of the people inside were dead already. And we're talking men, women, children. And what they did was that they sort of almost said to the Jews of Western Europe, we're resettling you. We're not going to kill you. Take what you can carry, get on the trains, and you're going to be resettled. They didn't want to tell them that they were taking them to be murdered. And they took suitcases with them. If you've ever been to Auschwitz, to the museum, you can see exhibitions of plates and crockery and cutlery. These weren't people who thought they were going to be murdered. They really thought they were being resettled. And these are images, again, they still continued the mass shooting of Jews in graves. You can see, these are pictures taken by the Nazis of the type of killing that took place before the gas chambers were used extensively. They created 40,000 camps of various sizes throughout occupied Europe. Some of them were death camps, some of them were concentration camps. Treblinka, for example, was where 900,000 Jews were murdered, was where Ike's mother, brother and sister were taken. Straight away, he'll talk about that in his story, and they were murdered there upon arrival. In Auschwitz-Birkenau, 1.3 million people were murdered. 1.1 million of them were Jews. The Nazis also murdered Roma and Sinti gypsies, disabled people, gay people, but the vast majority of people murdered by the Nazis, the 6 million, were Jews. What you're about to hear from these are the famous or infamous tracks into Birkenau, and these are pictures of prisoners in these death camps. And this is Bergen-Belsen, which was liberated by the British Army. And again, you can see the state that the Nazis kept their prisoners in, and these are the people that survived, and this is a mass grave in Bergen-Belsen. What you're about to hear from Ike Alterman is first-hand testimony of someone who was born in Poland before the war, lived in a Nazi-controlled ghetto, survived all of what you've just heard, including 4 death camps and a death march. And he'll talk to you about that later, about what that entailed. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from him, and then we're going to encourage you to ask questions. There's nothing that you can't ask him. He's happy to answer any form of question that you have about his experiences. But as always, it's my great honour and to introduce my dear friend Ike Alterman, who I have to say is the most incredible person that I have ever had the privilege of knowing.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay.
As I said, good morning, everybody. Trying to get myself sorted out. Start here. My name is Ike Alterman. Ike to my friends, because a lot of people can't pronounce Ike. Yeah. I was born in Ožarov, my mother's hometown. My mother's name was Chava Sora. In the southeast of Poland. In 1928, I had an older sister, Vega, and a younger brother, Pinkus. I remember that my father, Zacharias Feivel, had the first motorized taxi in the town. The car had a big horn on the driver's side of the car, and I loved to hoot it. When I was still young, we moved to my father's hometown, called Ostrowiec, which was approximately 25 kilometers away, so he could work in the family business. As well as work in the family business, my father would go to Warsaw, the capital of Poland, to buy parts, and he would assemble and sell racing bikes from the front room. The wheels were wooden, so the bikes would be light, and the tires were stamped "Made in England." We couldn't understand what "Made in England." We read it as "Made in England." I didn't know what that meant. I started Hebrew school at 3 years old, hated it, and very often my father dragged me through the streets, shouting and screaming to attend school. Children started Polish schools at 7 years old, and so I had only 2 years of secular schooling. Everything changed in September 1939 when war broke out. All Jewish businesses were closed and work, food, education were restricted. A ghetto was formed in 1941 in a small area of the town around where we lived. More and more people arrived from local towns, and were 16,000 people at any one time. German soldiers raided the ghettos regularly and took people away. They were never seen again. In 1942, all Jews were ordered to report to the town square. We were allowed to take with us only what we could carry in our hands. We were lined up in the square 4 or 5 rows deep, and we were kept standing for hours, fearful of what was awaiting us. I was standing behind my father. rest his soul, who told me to stand on my tiptoes, so I would look taller and older. My mother, my sister, and my little brother were standing next to my father. The German officer started to count the rows and stopped between my father and my mother. His arm came down, all of those like that. All those to the left of my father were marched out of the square, followed by guards with rifles. And brother were taken away. Straight. That was the last I saw of my mother, my sister, and my brother. They were taken straight to Treblinka, a death camp to be exterminated. My father and I were sent to work in the brickworks, and we slept on straw on the floor. I was only 13 years old, and life had changed beyond recognition. One day, when there was a raid in the ghetto, I was separated from my father and sent to Blizhin, my first concentration camp, on my own. If I thought the ghetto was bad, I was in for a real shock. In the camp there were many appels, which meant we were lined up in the open air and left to stand for hours, while the Nazis did a roll call, sometimes in dreadful conditions. In 1944, I was transported to Auschwitz and then marched to Birkenau. The following morning, I was tattooed. My number is B1209 on my arm. I wasn't Ike Alterman anymore then. I was a number. I remember the dreadful stench of burning flesh, and I can vividly remember the 4 chimneys glowing red night and day. I soon found out those came from the 4 crematoriums where they burned the bodies of the Jews who were murdered upon arrival in the gas chambers. I also remember witnessing bodies being buried in open mass graves and lime being poured on them after they had been killed. One of my first jobs was to collect clothing of the murdered prisoners and deliver them to the Nazis, so anything of value could be kept by the Nazis. I was then picked to work on a small farm to provide food for the officers and guards. The morning before Christmas, we were sent out in the bitter cold to pick sprouts for part of the officers' Christmas dinner. We had no proper shoes or warm clothes, and the snow was very deep and we were frozen to the bone. In the evening, the German political civilian who was in charge of our barrack ordered us to sit on our bunks and sing Silent Night to him. Silent Night, Ruhe Night, alles Ruhe, alles wach. That was in German, of course. For which we received a ladle of water with a couple of sprout leaves floating in it. That was our Christmas bonus. Needless to say, I have never been able to face sprouts to this day, as it brought back all the bad memories. In January 1945, I was one of 6,000 prisoners who were marched out of Auschwitz through the deep snow. Anyone who couldn't keep up was shot and left on the side of the road. Only a few hundred survived, and we ended up in Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany. In the middle of April, We were loaded onto the open cattle trucks with guards on all four corners of each truck, and we were transported. We journeyed wherever the train could go, as a lot of the railway lines were being borne by the Allies already. On the 8th of May, we arrived at Theresienstadt, yet another camp. Many people died on the route, and those who were still alive were due to go to the gas chambers the following day, myself included. That was not to be, as the war had ended that day and we were liberated by the Russian army. We were free. I remember not knowing what the word free meant, as I had not tasted freedom for so long. The Jewish Refugee Committee approached the British government and asked if they could bring over some orphaned children to England. Permission was given for 1,000 children. They had to be under the age of 16. And the Jewish Refugee Committee were to be responsible for all our needs. You would think this was a great achievement, but would you believe they only managed to find 732 surviving children. None of the survivors had any papers to prove our ages. So some of us gave false dates to enable us to be eligible for transportation. 3 months later, I was on the first transport of 300 children, flown from Prague in Lancaster bombers, destination Carlisle. When we arrived in Carlisle, we were taken into the airport hangar, where tables were set with plates of bread, with butter and jam, and tea with milk, something we never had at home, but soon got used to. Within minutes, the plates were empty as we stuffed the food into our pockets. As for so long, we never knew when we would get the next piece of bread. We were driven to Windermere and taken to a campsite near the lake. We thought we were in paradise. We were each taken to a chalet, given a room with our own bed, with a sheet and a pillow, hot showers and proper loos. The next morning we showered, put on our new underwear and clothes, and were taken to the main hall where we said our morning prayer. And breakfast was served. Food the likes of which we hadn't seen since before the war in 1939. We couldn't believe our eyes at all this food. It took us time to stop stuffing our pockets as soon as we saw food. Our minds were still fearful, and we were worried where the next meal would come because the fear we had in the camps. All the staff, many of whom were locals, were friendly and helpful and caring for us. I know how they were shocked at our appearance and terribly sad when they saw how starved we were, and the survival tactics that had become normal life for us. We started to learn to live again. Many boys went swimming in the lake. We played football. We were taken onto the steamers in the lake, and there were outings to Bo'ness and other parts of the Lake District. We learned to explore the area. We went to the cinema. We walked for miles in freedom. What a wonderful time it was. We stayed in Windermere for 3 months, learning to adjust to a new life. We formed friendships which have lasted to this day. We were known as the Holocaust surviving children. Later it was shortened to the boys. And now I am a Windermere boy. I am still in contact with my friends. They are all over the world. But unfortunately, Many have now passed on. We have an unbreakable bond, having survived the worst example of human behavior this world has ever seen. When we left Windermere, we were sent to hostels in various towns to start to build a life for ourselves, together with about 30 of the boys and girls. I came to Manchester and have lived here ever since. We were encouraged to look for work, and I started work in a garage, learning to repair tractors. After a while, I decided to get a job in jewelry trade. As a young boy back in Poland, I used to watch my uncles who were in the jewelry trade melting down old wedding rings with a blowtorch and turning them into liquid gold to make something new. In those days, everything was done by hand. So becoming a jeweler was like sawdust to the clowns. It got into my blood. I found myself a job and started to learn the trade. After a while, I moved to a bigger and a better company. While I was working there, I made myself a little bench at home, and I asked my boss to give me some work to take home. Some evenings I worked to 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and I earned an extra couple of pounds. Eventually, I opened my own workshop, doing repairs and remakes for the jewelry shops. I employed several skilled craftsmen, and I built up a successful business, and I had a very good name in the trade because of the high standard of work we produced. I retired from business when I was 73. The image I have always carried with me is of my mother, my sister and brother, leaving the square in Austria at gunpoint by German soldiers and being transported to Treblinka. For many years I had wanted to come to Treblinka to say Kaddish, the Jewish memorial prayer for the dead, for them. In August, at the age of 94, I made that journey with my partner, Diane. My daughter, Fionn, granddaughter, Danny, along with some very close friends. The Treblinka site is a massive place. We had to walk all the time from one place to another on a very hot day, and the place is covered with stones. Tens of thousands of stones, one of each town and village and city that the Jewish people were taken from by the Nazis and sent to Treblinka to be murdered. As I stood at the memorial stones for my hometowns, Ostrowiec and Ożarów, which is my mother's hometown, I could see my family's faces and I felt I was with them. It was a wonderful feeling, just releasing the tension. It was as if we were together. As I said Kaddish at the place they are buried, and where 900,000 other Jews were murdered by Nazis, I felt a huge sense of closure. I pray their souls are now truly resting at peace. I've always believed my mother is my guiding angel. I've learned something from everything I have looked at and everything I've been through. That's my education. I have never harmed anybody. I have never done anybody for a shilling. I don't owe any money to anybody, so I must have done something right. I'm getting by, I'm not starving, and my children are not starving. I always wanted my children to have a better life than me. Unfortunately, I can't erase some of my bad memories. They will always be with me to the day I die. I've had some good things happen as well, as I try to balance it out as best as I can. I've learned to live and appreciate what I have. I have 2 wonderful daughters, 2 grandchildren. I was happily married to Myra for over 30 years, and unfortunately she passed away. I bless the day I met my partner Diane, who I've been with for nearly 25 years. It's a record. No one is immortal, and as the years pass, there is danger that the Holocaust will recede in history. This must not happen. We must never forget what man is capable of, and so we must pass on the warning from generation to the generations. It's why I say to all of you, please remember my story. Remember the family I lost, and remember the 6 million who were slaughtered simply because they were Jews. Because if you don't remember, then who will? Thank you for listening to me. I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
You can sit down. You can sit down. Sit down and have questions.
The sun's come out.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll all agree that that's an incredibly powerful first-hand testimony. There are very, very few people, unfortunately, alive still who experienced what Itzik has experienced in living through 4 death camps and a death march, surviving that and building a life for himself. He's more than happy to answer any questions that you might have on his life, his experiences, lessons that he'd like to share. So if anybody has any questions, just put your hand up. It's always hard for one person to go first, so come on. Anybody?
Go on, ask a question.
Go on.
Do you still have your tattoo?
I'm very hard of hearing.
I'll repeat
very
it.
hard of hearing.
Do you still have your tattoo?
Sorry?
Do you still have your tattoo?
Yes. If I can get to it.
Okay.
No, I'll have to open this.
Hold on, I'll do it. There we are.
B12.
Just stand up for 1 sec.
B1209.
So most prisoners, when they arrived at death camps or concentration camps, were given a number, and that was what they were referred to. They ceased to be a name or a person. They just became a number. And yeah.
Have you ever thought about getting removed, or do you feel that's part of you?
Have you ever thought about having it taken off?
Oh, no. No. This is there, so I should never forget what I've been through.
Do you want to just explain as well, maybe, you spoke about what life was like in the ghetto. Do you want to just explain what it was like, what the Nazis were like to Jewish people living in those ghettos?
Well, yes. The ghettos basically is they got all the Jews from way out, in say in our hometown, and they put them in a smaller place. And you were not allowed to get out. You were already wearing the yellow Star of David to be recognized that you were a Jew, also somebody from the ghetto. And if the law was then passed that if anybody tries to get out of the ghetto, they will be shot.
And what about if you were walking down a street and you saw a German soldier?
If you're walking down the street, you always try to get on the other side, because they used to take liberties at times, because they were walking about with Alsatian dogs. The Alsatian dogs were trained for one specific thing. And when they saw a Jew, they said to the dog, "You there, Jew." And they let go, and they tore people to smithereens to have a bit of fun. They called it fun. We didn't. These people never survived once the animals got onto them.
How do you feel about Germans today? Have you been to Germany?
How?
What do you feel about Germans?
Well, German, it's a funny thing. People, after being through all this, I don't hate the Germans. Why? Because Hitler brought in a law to hate Jews. Jews, no matter where, good, bad, or whatever, Jews had to be exterminated. Now, if I turn around now, they say, I hate Jews.
Germans. If you hate Germans.
Sorry, I hate Germans. I would be preaching the same thing as Hitler. How can I hate Germans when Germans, they've not even been born. They don't know anything about it. They weren't involved with anything. It's only the Nazis that I hate for what they did to the Jewish people.
It was interesting because Ike's book, which you can see on the screen there, is used in a number of schools up and down the country as part of their Year 9 history curriculum. And there's a school in Greater Manchester, the Wellington School in Timperley, which uses it. And Ike had a very powerful letter written to him about 6 months ago by a Ukrainian refugee, a 15-year-old girl who's studying there, who'd read his book and said how powerful she found it and how important it was to tell the truth about what happened in the camps, because there is still today, sadly, people who deny the Holocaust happened, people who say it wasn't as big as you might have thought, or actually it's all made up. And she said how she felt how important it was that he tells the stories of what he experienced there. But she said to him, you know, she's experienced war twice in her 14 or 15 years of life, and how did he survive it and how did he overcome it? But also she asked that question, can I ask how you feel about Germans? And Ike met Sonia a number of weeks ago, and she said, because I want to understand how I should feel towards Russians. And his message resonated really with her. She said she's not quite ready at that stage yet, but in time she hopes that she will be, because it is a powerful message of tolerance. And I think that's one of the things that everybody should take from this, is that if in the world we don't have tolerance and we don't have acceptance, then what happened 80 years ago can happen again. You have to remember that the Holocaust didn't happen in some faraway place. It happened in the middle of Europe in the 1930s, in a society that was enlightened, that had doctors, philosophers, professors, universities. It was a modern society when Hitler came to power, and he turned that country and into killers. Not all of them, as it says, but a lot. And so I think that's a really powerful message as well to take. Yes.
You're a remarkable man and a remarkable example of a human being. Did you experience any kindness at all during your time of growing up through the Germans?
No.
Nothing?
No. I don't know whether some Germans were fearful to show that they don't hate Jews or not. Maybe a few odd ones. So that's why I've always said I can't hate the whole society there, because some of these people may have been innocent.
Did you also have any opportunity through the camps to try and see a way out? Was there any opportunities?
To escape?
No.
No.
No. You knew. I mean, remember the concentration camps were all electrified. As soon as you tried to get anywhere near the perimeter, you were electrocuted. Didn't have a chance.
You also weren't, you were wearing rags for clothes. You didn't have proper shoes.
No. And I was only a child on my own.
Who kept you going?
Sorry?
Who kept you going? How did you keep going?
I think, and I really believe that my late mother was my guardian angel. And she still is.
I think the fortitude that people like Ike have. I went with some colleagues from work to Poland in December, the beginning of December, and we spent a day. We were in Auschwitz-Birkenau. We also went to Majdanek, which is a concentration camp with gas chambers in the heart of Lublin, right on the edge of the city, and it was bitterly cold. It was maybe -1, -2, and we'd had a breakfast in the morning, and we were dressed up warmly, and we had 2 pairs of socks on and gloves and a hat, and it was horrible. How people like Ike survived with no food, with no heating, with no proper clothes, being forced to work out in the open, is just incredible. And again, I think that is a lesson, especially perhaps for the younger members in the audience here, that no matter what you encounter in your life, no matter how hard or what challenges you face, if you just think about this incredible person here and what he's overcome and what he's still doing at the age of almost 95, then nothing that you face in your life is insurmountable.
95 in May.
In May, I said almost 95. I said almost 95. So I think it's an incredibly powerful story. Somebody at the back wanted to ask it, yeah.
Ike, it's an honour to have you here at the club today, and I think your story has moved all of us. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, he said it's an honour to have you at the club, and your story has moved all of them.
Thank you.
My question is that your experiences started not a lot older than some of our academy players. What advice would you give to them? It's probably not dissimilar to those that you've just said, but what advice would you give to these young people?
When war broke out,
Yeah.
and you were in the ghetto and you were separated from your mother and your brother and your sister, you weren't much older than many of the people in this room today.
Oh,
You were younger.
I was only about 13 years old.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to them?
Well, the advice I can give you is to be brave enough to look out for things that may still happen. If you're not careful, if you don't look out for this and speak about it and try. I mean, you still get some people who say the Holocaust never happened. The 6 million Jews never happened. All that. So you've got the knowledge about this that I spoke about. Speak to them and argue with them that they are wrong by saying, no, these things never happened.
And in terms of being tolerant of other people?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Don't think about just yourself. Think about others who are worse off than you. Try and help your fellows, or you people in general, old people. Do something to help others, because there are a lot of people who are starving, who've got bad health and all that. If you can help somebody to the hospital, give them a lift or whatever, show that you can do something for other people other than yourself.
Any other questions? I think it might be also interesting just to explain, in the camps, when you were in Birkenau,
Yeah.
just explain a bit more about what life was like. I know you spoke about seeing the crematoria and the gas chambers,
Yeah.
but what was life like in general?
Well, you were in the barrack, you locked in. Barrack, 150 people in a barrack, a wooden barrack. So it was,
The bunks were 3 levels high and you were crammed in and there was nowhere to go.
it was, snow, deep snows, and all that. And all you got is a ladle of black water. Supposed to be coffee. In actual fact, it was ersatz, which was made out of coal. And they call this coffee. So you got a ladle of that if you got. If not, you just hold it like, anything to try and get it into your body, you know. And you got a piece of bread. How can I describe it? A piece of bread like that, long. That was your life.
And you witnessed the transports, the trains coming in,
Absolutely.
the Jewish people being separated, some that way who lived, most that way who died.
Yeah. The selection.
The selection.
Yeah. Well, I was in the selection.
Yeah.
Luckily, I was picked to go that way rather than the other way. The others were straight to the crematorium.
Within 30 minutes, the vast majority of Jewish people who got off those trains at Birkenau were dead. Within 30 minutes. And you can see pictures, all their suitcases and clothes left on that ramp in the middle of Birkenau, just left there, and most of them were taken straight to the gas chambers, murdered, and then the bodies were burnt.
And you know what? Near the end of the war, when the Germans were running short of ammunition, they used to pick up children by their legs, knock their heads to kill them, to save bullets.
This is, again, as Ike has just said, this is first-hand
It's a
testimony.
fact.
And then
And tearing the babies away from the mothers. And if the mother was trying to stop them and all that, so they either killed the baby or killed the mother. It's just practicing, killing all the time.
And when they took you on the death march from Birkenau,
Yeah.
what was that death march like?
Well, we were marching, and you must remember in Germany, in Poland, and all that, and the snows was that deep at times, and a lot of people couldn't keep up. Those who couldn't keep up, a bullet, and leave them at the side.
And what did you eat anything on those death marches?
No.
Did you drink anything?
Oh, yes. And one place we stopped, I remember, and it's a town called, in Germany, it was called Mariaschein. And the railways stopped. We couldn't get off the railways. They brought these containers on the side with the soup ladle and all that. And they tried to ladle some of that soup, but the soup was a killer. It was so salty that by the time the people got moving further on, they were dying because no water.
They did it on purpose.
Purposely salted it so much that people didn't have any water and they died off. When we were liberated, most of the people were lying dead on the wagons. I've got pictures about all this. Yeah.
And what do you feel now to finish? Are there any other questions? Yes, there are. Great. Okay. Yes.
Ike, yeah, thanks ever so much for sharing your story. It's been heartbreaking and so inspiring at the same time. A couple of things. When was the next time you actually pressed the car horn?
When was it?
When was the next time you pressed the car horn after the war?
Oh no, we didn't have that.
No, after the war, when was the next time? You know, when as a child you pressed the car horn.
No, that was before the
Yeah, when was the time? When was the first time after the war that you did it? When you were probably fixing tractors.
there was no.
When you got your first car.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe when I used my first car. This was already in the 50s.
So, Ike, since you came back from the war, what are you most proud of?
Pardon?
What are you most proud of?
I'm proud of the fact that I made my way, as I said before. I've not hurt anybody. I run a business. I built a business up. I was a member of the London Diamond Bows, which you had to be A1, because if you did something bad, you were blacklisted. So, yes, I was proud of that. And the fact that people in the trade used to send their work, because the shops didn't have any workshops in the shops, you know, in the background. So they had to sublet to people what they used to call working jewelers. I had wonderful place. My staff had to be, well, I used to train all this, had to do the work to my standard. No, anybody that left me for some reason to go to another job, who you been working for? Mr. Alterman. Don't need it anymore. You can have a job.
It's an incredible when you think about what, you know, at the age of 13, 14, being torn from your family. You know, we think what we were all like at maybe 13 or 14, but then to come to this country and to make a career and to build a phenomenal business, to raise a family, it's an incredible achievement.
Money was never the best thing to me. I was more concerned about the people knew they wanted quality work. There were some other jewelers in Manchester as well. There were butchers.
Was another question at the back? Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, if you had to kind of give a sentence looking back on your life, how would you describe your life? Would it be angry and sad at what happened in your younger years, or kind of really happy and grateful to the way that things are?
Well,
If you had to, maybe in a bit more than a sentence, but if you had to summarize your life, would it be one of anger and pain, or would it be one of hope and sort of contentment?
I've had a lot of contentment. As I said, my children, my grandchildren, I mean, I give them pocket money. Every week, pocket money. Some of them are now 40, 50, 60 years old. I'm still paying pocket money. It's a tradition, and it gives me great pleasure, the fact that I'm here and see they enjoy the money.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I'm just going to say, I think that's, thank you so much for coming. Sorry, one more question.
Did you have any mates in the concentration camp?
Did you have any friends in the concentration camps?
No, no, because in the concentration camps, you never knew whether you were the next to be slaughtered. You never knew. You lived from one day to the next, and sometimes you could be picked on to go to the crematorium.
Before we finish, just explain briefly about the time that you met your aunt.
Oh yes.
Just remember, this is in Birkenau, where there were hundreds of thousands of Jewish prisoners.
Yes, one day I came out and I was walking near the perimeter, and I noticed there's a women's camp segregated from the men. And I walked across there, and suddenly I noticed one of my aunties. And I had a piece of bread left, like that. And I threw it. I mean, that was terrible, because I could have got shot. Because in each corner of the camp, there was the guards sitting in the
watchtowers,
you know. And I threw that little piece of bread I had over the wire to her. And she told me, your father was here yesterday where you standing. I couldn't believe it. She says, yes. So what happened to him? They sent him to a Buna. Buna, a works.
Yeah, very notorious works camp where I think life expectancy was about 3 months.
That's where he died. And that was it. I never saw her after that.
So, thank you very much for listening. As I said, I would like to say to you, hopefully you found it a privilege to hear from somebody such as Ike, who's experienced the worst crime that mankind ever committed, the murder of 6 million Jews simply for being Jewish. And as we come up to Holocaust Memorial Day, a week on Friday, please think about that. Please be ambassadors. Tell people you've heard this story, that it happened, that it should never happen again. And also remember other genocides that happened in the world and that are still happening today. Because if we don't all have hope and tolerance and acceptance and take a lesson from this incredible man, then as we see, sadly, things can happen again, and we all have a part to play in ensuring that that doesn't happen. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate you coming to listen.
Thank you.
Can we just ask them to fill in some feedback? We'll give out some papers afterwards.
I guess just to summarise and say thank you on behalf of the club to you, Rafi, again, for inviting Ike along to tell his story, but also again to help facilitate and give your side.
Pleasure.
And again, I guess I look at that and go, if I'm 94 and doing that well, I think we're all doing right. So, Ike, I think you're doing very well. Your sense of humour, ability to tell that story.
It's due to this man here that it's got me to talk about what he's done for me. Is show me the way to live again.
So yeah, and then your inspiration, the story. Again, if we take out that mental strength, resilience, bravery, you know, if we can all take some of that out of you and take that forward in our lives, and obviously doing very well. Thank you very much. Again,
thank you.